welcome to another episode of Sidebar. I'm Maya. I'm a lawyer in our labor and employment group, and I'm with my colleague
Emma. I'm Emma. I'm also a lawyer here in labor and employment. What's our topic today, Maya?
Our topic is AI, and I'm curious, should people use AI when they're wondering about an employment law issue?
I mean, people certainly are using AI, and you certainly can use AI, but I think today we're going to talk a little bit about whether you should be using AI.
Yes, that is really the crux of it. I'm curious about how you're seeing AI used in your practice in terms of sort of the client side of it. I'm certainly starting to see clients coming in having clearly used AI as a starting point.
Yeah, I would agree. We're definitely seeing, I think, more and more of it. And I guess to be clear, like we use AI in our practices. And like AI is used in our biggest legal research tool we use. AI is used, it's in a lot of things, but I think really we're talking about this generative AI where people are going to AI and sort of asking specific questions about their situation. And I'm seeing it almost right now as almost an intermediary where people are coming in and they first asked ChatGPT or, Copilot or some sort of AI agent what they should do, and then bringing that information to me and sort of either asking me to double check it or saying, hey, look, I've got a head start for you. And then we take it from there. But I'm going to be honest, it doesn't really help. And it's sort of just adding like a bit more clunkiness to the process.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing something similar in my practice where sometimes when I'm actually emailing with clients, it almost feels like I'm emailing
I'm
with
seeing that for sure.
ChatGPT, where they're taking something and taking it into AI and then coming back to me. And, I certainly Google things when I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do too. And, that's not a bad thing to have some sort of a starting place. And I would say there are lots of resources online that are really well curated to give you a starting point. So many community legal clinics will put out information about employment rights. Lots of law blogs, our own law blog, puts out information that is helpful about employment rights.
You can find the Human Rights Legal Support Center has a lot of really helpful things for navigating that process. There are great resources out there, and certainly I think those are helpful for clients getting a start on things. I would not shy away from telling people to sort of use a search engine to find those things. How do you think people are coming to you now with it as this intermediary?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing it where someone I see it kind of at a couple instances. So one is at the beginning where someone has sort of put not even necessarily their full fact situation, but they've said, am I being constructively dismissed at work? They've put something into ChatGPT, I think probably most of the time. And then they're sending me an email and saying, I think this is happening because AI has told them, yes, it does look like a constructive dismissal. So then they're coming to me sort of already down a bit of a path. And in some cases, they've already sort of used ChatGPT to start having, to draft correspondence with their employer. Like they're already sort of far down a path. So I see that at the beginning instance.
And is that helpful?
Oftentimes, no. And I think we can talk about that. Come back to it. And this, like the sort of second thing that I'm seeing, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, is where, we're already in process, and maybe we have a counter offer from opposing counsel, and we're sending it to the client to take a look at, and then rather than the client saying, here are my concerns. Instead, what comes back is, here are all of the potential counter arguments to it. So rather than them telling us, well, this is my issue with the counter offer, it's sort of what is ChatGPT telling you the potential issues are with the counter offer. So
yeah. I find that difficult because when I want to hear what my client thinks about the offer, not what ChatGPT says they should think about the offer. And so I find that quite challenging because it's important for me to know how you're feeling about it, how you're sense about it. And I don't care if you're sending me sort of really well-written emails, right? Like you can send me point form, you can send me whatever, or we can get on a call. But what matters to me is how you feel about it and how that might affect your life. And that's what I think what I'm trying to get at. And sometimes it feels like when people are putting those thoughts into AI, they're getting spit out sort of a professional or a polished answer, but it doesn't give me what my client thinks about it.
Yeah.
At least not yet.
What are some of the things that you kind of contemplate when, when you have a counteroffer, or when you have, or not even necessarily at that stage, but even earlier in the process, like that you're considering that are sort of fact specific to the client that you think, you're thinking about that ChatGPT or AI is not thinking about?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's fair. Maybe ChatGPT has these considerations or is, it's developing so quickly that it's hard for us to sort of say for sure what it is and isn't doing.
Yeah.
But I think from my end, I've talked to my client and I've got a sense of what matters to them, right? Like, do they have, maybe their spouse is also out of a job. And so them proceeding with constructive dismissal, which means, you really have to quit your job and then try and go knock on the door of your employer and say, hey, let's try and negotiate. That's a really hard sort of process to go through. And if I know my client is dealing with sort of other things at home, then maybe we can have a conversation of, is this the right thing for you right now? And I think putting it in the context of my client's life is really what we're trying to do and get a sense of, that we can sort of look at that full picture.
Yeah. When someone, kind of going back to something we talked about earlier, when someone comes to you at that initial stage and they've already sort of put things through ChatGPT and maybe are kind of on that path a little bit, how are you finding it? Like, do you find it to be a cost saver for them?
Almost never. It's oftentimes we get sort of these very long documents that are, and the length of the document is not really the issue, but it's often that these sort of details are kind of extra, they're kind of things that we don't necessarily need to know. They focus too much on really small details, but leave out really big ones, right? Like they're not. And so we're getting these documents that set out what someone else thinks is important to you. And I want to know what's important to you, right? And that's what it comes down to. And when you put your pen to paper and say, here's how I'm feeling about it, I'm getting a sense of what you're feeling and not what you think you might be feeling. And so trying to sort of separate those things. And I get that that's a bit more work for the client. And I think at the end, we're going to talk about some of the ways we see AI being used in a helpful space. But it's really sort of hearing from my client about what they're feeling. And when I get these sort of many, many, many paragraphs of extra details, or we've set down another path, it can be more expensive because I have to look into those options, right? I have a duty to sort of look into the whole case and consider all your options, and that's totally fair. But it can, in the end, be more expensive. Just like when I sort of send an email looking for a quick response on something and you send back a whole bunch of different considerations, that again can raise your legal fees.
Yeah, that certainly aligns with what I'm seeing in terms of my practice, where oftentimes the long-winded AI response or the back and forth that I'm having as AI is the intermediary ends up with me spending a lot more time on the file, and the way that our practice works, the more time that we're spending on it, the higher the costs are associated with it. So yeah. I'm curious, you touched on this a little bit. How are you seeing AI used by clients in a way that is helpful?
Yeah, and I think that's fair, right? Like AI is changing all the time. It's certainly, by the time we probably release this Sidebar episode, it'll probably be new again. And that's fair. And so, I certainly wouldn't want to say you shouldn't be using it at all. And I don't think that's a reality. But I do think that there's strategic ways to use it that might be helpful. So, Maya and I spoke to some of our colleagues about what they're seeing that's helpful. And some of them that we've seen are, for example, creating a timeline, right? Like if you've got a whole bunch of different thoughts and a whole bunch of different information, sort of asking it to sort of clearly set it all out in a timeline, that can be helpful. And, I see that as using it more in sort of the capabilities of AI that are taking your materials and translating it as opposed to adding opinions. And I think that's, for me, sort of where I see the difference. That's a big one, is the timeline. I've seen some people have a lot of success in like summarizing quite large documents or, interview notes or whatever, and just sending a summary, especially as we get started. Of course, down the road, we might want to see that whole thing, but to get a sense of what documents are, there's a summary. What about you? What are you seeing?
That's very similar to what I'm seeing. And I think when you're talking about sort of a timeline, I think it can be helpful to think about an example where that would be particularly useful. And what comes to mind for me are workplace investigations or, in a situation where there's perhaps ongoing harassment or something that might lead to an investigation. When clients come and they have made a complaint or are contemplating making a complaint, there's normally quite a long history of things that have happened, these little micro things that are adding up. And, when you're under a lot of stress, which normally you are if you're going to be making this sort of complaint, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the timeline of what's happened. And I can spend a significant amount of time with someone trying to clarify, well, wait, did that happen before this or after this? And I think AI can be a tool for clients to help them sort of organize, well, here's actually when it all happened, and get that chronology organized in a way that probably ends up saving hours of my time organizing the chronology, or if we have a student helping, that sort of thing is really effective in having a really productive first meeting to say, okay, now I have a sense of how this has happened, and we don't have to spend the first few meetings for me understanding, okay, wait, when did this happen? Wait, I thought that happened after. Like, that sort of tool could be really effective in terms of actually finding efficiencies.
And I want to circle back to something you said it twice there, is AI as a tool, right? And I think that is maybe, I think, where we both have sort of seen it used the most effectively in sort of seeking legal advice or working with your lawyer, is using AI as a tool to get that information to your lawyer, but not necessarily relying on it. Honestly, sometimes it feels like as a second lawyer, right? Like trying to get a second opinion there. If you're looking for a second opinion, that's absolutely your prerogative, but it can, if it's this sort of AI agent that you're then turning to, it can frankly complicate matters for us.
Yeah. And I think in that, like, a few examples of how it actually does complicate matters.
Yeah.
Because AI is scanning, the internet, it is picking up on things that aren't necessarily relevant in the jurisdiction. So I'll have clients sometimes come and say, well, what about this? Well, that's actually not relevant in Ontario. That could be relevant in the US. That could be relevant in a different jurisdiction. And then I'm spending a lot of time talking about, well, here's why it's not relevant. Or AI has hallucinated a case, and someone says, well, my facts are really similar to this case. And I spend quite a bit of time trying to figure out, does this case actually exist because it's not showing up on CanLII, which is the normal place that we look, or the other places that we would look, Westlaw or any of our other search engines. And I'm thinking, is it not a reported decision? And then you actually find out the case doesn't exist.
Yeah. And that was always,
and that's maybe an hour spent trying to figure out, well, what the heck? So it can really lead you down these paths that are not helpful. And sometimes it's picking up on legislation that's no longer in effect. It's picked up on something that was relevant 10 years ago. And since then, the law has changed, but there's old content out there on the internet, and no one has told AI that, no, this is no longer relevant. So these are sort of the very practical ways that we see it when it's operating as kind of a de facto second opinion. It can often lead us in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And another example from our context in the employment law is we spend a lot of time thinking about notice periods. And it's it's not a science, it's more of an art, but I often see clients coming in with an expectation of a notice period that is frankly really, really long as compared to what they might get. But they've sort of started this process with an expectation of, I'll get 18 months, where in reality, a court might award you, let's say 14 at a court, but a settlement means you're going to get less than that. But the client has been told to expect 18 months, and that can make negotiations quite challenging. The other context that I've seen it, well, I haven't seen it. This is a secondhand story, so it's a bit like, my friend's aunts told me this, but a reputable source has told me that.
A really reliable aunt has told me this.
Yeah, no, a colleague, a really reliable colleague,
great.
Has said that in the family law context, they're seeing clients, they might represent one parent who drafts an email using ChatGPT, send it to the other family member who reads the email, but sends it through ChatGPT and gets a response. And so it's no longer them replying, it's just one AI replying to another AI. And in doing so, they're kind of convoluting this story where really they actually agree on the issues. They're just sort of complicating matters a little bit. And I find that really tough, right? Is that you can resolve this, we could find a way through, but we're kind of seeing these sort of imagined problems arriving. And, as always, I think really it's a tool and not something to sort of give your whole, outsource all of your thinking to.
Ultimately, what we want when we're in practice, and it relates to this, is what we want is the best outcome that we can get for you, not the best outcome that we can get for your AI agent or whomever. It's in your circumstances, with what's going on in your life, what is the best outcome that we can get? And we're going to ask questions and factor in all of the relevant things. And that could be that you have to maintain your benefits because your kid relies on certain medication. We're going to ask those questions to make sure that we get the best possible outcome for you in your individual circumstance. And that requires us talking to you and understanding your issue.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of at the base of all of our relationships and work as lawyers is talking to our clients, figuring out what's going on and helping them to solve the problems. And I just hate when, can I cut? I thought I had a good response, and then I got
then you got cold feet.
Well, then I said I hate, and I was like,
bad word, hate.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll where do we lead into that?
You were talking about how the client relationship, and I was just going to say, I think what's at the heart of all that we do is lawyers, is we talk to our clients, we figure out what's going on with them, and we try and resolve their problems. And AI can be a tool to help with that, but it's certainly not the only thing that should stand in our way. And when it does stand in the way, it can make things more difficult, both in the relationship between the lawyers and the clients and increase your legal fees, neither of things which we're looking for here.
Absolutely. What's very exciting is that this area is constantly evolving. And I think that there is lots for us to talk about in future episodes of Sidebar on this subject.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Maya.
Thank you.